Well, we are missing a number of our regular crowd tonight, but that just makes everybody who's here that much more precious. I'm glad to see you, and I'm grateful for this time together, and I hope that we can use it profitably, use it well. We began a study dealing with first principles, and I mean by that particularly first principles of faith. I don't remember any time in my lifetime a time in which faith was attacked more openly and more viciously. It's not even a question anymore of whether we ought to have faith in God. It's just assumed. Anybody that has any level of knowledge and understanding is moved on beyond that. Religion is part of an old time that's past, and that we now live in a scientific age, and so the idea of believing in God and a Creator is simply just dismissed summarily. And so with that in mind, it's not wise for us to assume, is it, that our children know and they're ready to face that. Maybe we've had some more training. Maybe we've had more time to get our feet on the ground. But young people can be heavily influenced by the world in which they live. And the world has never been closer to them than it is now. Everybody's got a smartphone, it seems like. Well, that's good, bad, or indifferent. And there are a lot of young people who have access to this, and they're constantly hearing messages, some of them subtle, some of them not subtle, that attack their faith. So I thought it worth our while to spend a few lessons thinking about some fundamentals concerning why we believe in God, and is that reasonable? Is it defensible? And tonight I want to begin a lesson dealing with the question, does God exist? Is it reasonable to believe in God? There certainly are many who would have no problem saying, no, it's absurd. This fellow you may never have heard of. He was a well-known mathematician who lived back in the early 20th century, late 19th century. He was no dummy, a brilliant fellow. But he made a statement that I've heard repeated, all through the years of my lifetime. There's no evidence or proof of the existence of a God that's been found in the phenomena of nature or based on experience. Celebrity atheists even now will say they've just never seen any evidence of a God, which is, to my mind, as absurd as someone standing before a great crowd of people and saying, I don't believe there's any evidence that there are human beings on earth. Are you not standing there? Are you not speaking? Where did you get that breath? Where do you think all this came from? But to him, that is not considered. He just thinks, well, there's no, I don't know what he means by evidence in nature. Does he mean that God must come down and physically show himself by waving to him, or bringing down some fireball from the sky on command? Or it's a remarkable blindness to me. No evidence of God. I think that some who have thought maybe more carefully have offered a number of different avenues of evidence in which God shows himself to be very real in the world in which he made. And so we'd like to explore these. We're not going to get through all these. In fact, we may just get through one of them tonight. But in thinking about how to approach the question, is there a God? And by the way, to approach it with people who may not be convinced simply by turning over to Genesis chapter 1 and saying, in the beginning, God. I believe Genesis 1. I believe it's powerful. But I have also, I think, developed an appreciation for the authenticity of the Word of God. But you and I are going to be talking, and we do talk to people every day, may work with them, may go to school with them. And they don't have that same faith in the Scriptures. And so what is to be done to try to get them to think and consider the voice of God in the Scriptures? I think it's not out of bounds to point to God's creation and to ask the question, is it reasonable to believe that this exists without God? The existence of the universe, the design of the universe, the existence of life, and even the existence of morality. Without God, where do those things come from? How could they be without a creator? I think those are valid questions. Let's think for a moment about the first one. the very existence of things, of God, suggests, of the universe, I should say, suggests the fact, the undeniable fact of a creator. The Hebrew writer put it simply: for every house is built by someone, but he that builds all things is God. Even I can understand that. None of us would come to a building like this and think, I wonder if this just made itself. Everybody understands the existence of the building demands a builder. And that, I think, is a point well made. When you try to talk to people about this subject, one of the ways in which that faith of creator from creation is expressed is what's called the cosmological argument. Now, let me say this. These terms you may or may not find helpful, but you will hear them. And when people use that, when they say that the cosmological argument for God is a strong one, what they're talking about is that word cosmos is actually a Greek word that suggests the idea of order. And we borrow that to describe the universe. Everything we see around us, the unity and the working design of the universe, of the world, in and of itself suggests something of a creator. There's a syllogism that's been used. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning. Therefore, the universe had a cause. That's one way, I think, to approach the question. The fact that the universe exists suggests that it got here by means of a creator. The universe had a beginning. I think that's generally accepted now, that the universe did have a beginning. There have been times in history, and maybe even a few years ago, when there were smart people who suggested that the universe was essentially eternal. I think the technical term for that was called the steady state theory. And what it basically said was that the universe actually has always been. And that frees me from the whole sticky question of a creator, because after all, the universe has always been. Again, I don't think anybody credible believes that anymore. One of the things that, of course, this precedes some of that thought, is when Einstein developed his theory of relativity. And boy, I was no science major. But what that basically said was that there is a direct connection between time and space and matter. They are all interrelated. And just as surely as matter had a beginning, so space and time had a beginning. You can't have one without the other. Through the years, as more and more physics experiments have been shown and proven to back up this idea, there's one old fellow named Arthur Eddington. He was a famous cosmologist 100 years ago. And he was quoted as saying this. He said, philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant to me. I should like to find a genuine loophole. Why would he say that? Because these fellows start out with the idea, well, we sure don't want to sound like preachers. We don't want to go around talking about God. You know, a lot of brilliant scientists through the years have done just exactly that. There are plenty of scientists that have through the years been pioneers in their field who were open believers in God. But for many years now, it's been cool to be an atheist. And those who did not parrot that were seen as somehow lesser minds. But certainly in my lifetime, we have seen a movement away from any such notion of an eternal universe to the idea of a universe that had a beginning. In fact, when I was in school, and I suppose this is true now and was even before, a few years before, the Big Bang theory, as it's called, was taught in schools. I had a professor who tried to teach us non-science majors physics, and he talked about that quite a bit, about the Big Bang. This is a fellow, I didn't have him as a teacher, but Robert Jastrow. was no Christian. He was Columbia educated. He was one of the fellows who joined with NASA from the very beginning of the institution of that organization. So here's a fellow, brilliant, highly educated, well thought of in his field, a theoretical physicist of some considerable standing. Well, in the late 70s, Jastrow, who up to that time had been sort of a confirmed agnostic, wrote a book he called God and the Astronomers. And in this book, and maybe you've read it, if you haven't, you might find it interesting, but Mr. Jastrow really rather candidly talks about how his views on things had changed, looking back on the history of the science in his lifetime. He said, in part, "Now we see how the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. Details differ," he says, "but the essential elements in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis are the same. The chain of events leading to man commenced suddenly and sharply at a definite moment in time in a flash of light and energy." He said, we've come to understand this as astronomers, not as theologians, but as astronomers. I don't remember this book being quoted by our old professor, but I do remember him making the point in class. He said, yes, after many different ideas, we have finally come as physicists to agreement that there was a great bang in which all we know started. He said, it sounds like Genesis. That was his statement. Mr. Jastrow writes something very similar. He says, astronomers now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in the cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, scientifically proven fact. Now, he wouldn't take that as far as he should. He's not going to come to the meeting this week. He's dead, by the way, anyway. But he's not going to be here with us. But just he's forced as an honest man by the evidence of what he's seen and what he's read to know that science has made clear that all we know has a beginning point, a sudden beginning point, in which all was created. And even he notes the fact that that compares very well with what the Bible teaches. The point is, space and time and matter came into existence at one point, and there was no natural law, natural world prior to that one point. And since a cause cannot come after its effect, then natural forces can't account for this beginning. You know, you turn the light switch and then the light comes on. It's not the other way around. And when, natural forces are created, there must have been something to create them. Natural force can't create itself. There has to be something outside of nature to do the job. That is, by definition, what supernatural means. Now we haven't come to the point of the God of the Bible. We're just simply saying that logic brings us to the idea that the universe could not have created itself. It was created, and therefore there had to be a creator outside of what we know to be so. Now, again, I understand, I like textual studies, but we're talking here reasoning through these things in order that we might get people interested in giving the Bible account a look. And I do believe that there is reason to do that because science and what it's discovered has pointed us toward the very idea of a creator for creation. Let me go back to Jastrow just a minute because what he wrote was really extraordinary. He said, theologians are generally delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning, but astronomers are curiously upset. Why would people be upset? If they're scientists, why would they care where the science led them? Well, he says there's a kind of religion in science. Every effect must have its cause, and yet there's no first cause. That is curious, isn't it? You know what an atheist thinks, and I've heard this over the last several years. I mean, these are smart people. And they will maybe be in a public debate with a creationist. And let me tell you what they think is their gotcha question. They will say to this fellow, you claim that God created everything. Who created God? You reckon these children could probably answer that for him? There has to be a first cause. That's what God is. He's the first cause. If matter is not eternal, and nobody believes that it is, it had to have a beginning, and therefore the first cause is just logically unavoidable. But not to these folks. They deny that because they know what that would say. So he continues. This religious faith of the scientist, the atheist, the agnostic, is violated by the discovery that the world had a beginning under conditions in which the known laws of physics are not valid because they hadn't been created yet. And as a product of forces or circumstances we cannot discover. Notice what he says next. When that happened, scientists have lost control. As usual, when faced with trauma, the mind reacts by ignoring the implications in science. This is known as, quote, refusing to speculate. Now, when you sit down to talk to people who so assuredly say, well, I don't know, it doesn't matter, or I don't believe in God, well, how do you explain this? Well, I don't want to speculate. That means you can't answer the obvious implication of your own idea. Or by trivializing the origin of the world, calling it the Big Bang, as if it were the universe was a firecracker. That's right. I do find that an offensive term. But it's a term that these people will concede the universe had a beginning. The point we're making is the cosmological argument, if you want to use that formal logic, it says that there has to be, if there is a creation, a creator. Another term that you'll read that sounds scientific and difficult, but really is not, is the term entropy. You may be well familiar with that term. It again is borrowed from the Greeks, and it suggests the idea of within change, or change within a closed system. The definitions that are often given to me are not all that helpful. In fact, it may seem even confusing. But it basically might be explained, maybe oversimplified, but basically understood as this, that things in a closed system run down. I'll tell you something, it's not, even I can understand. You put gas in your car. If you have an electric car, this may not mean anything to you, but if you put gas in your car, there's a finite amount of that gas. And by running the engine, that gasoline is changed to a gas instead of a liquid. And if you don't add to it, it's a closed system. You know what happens? You watch that needle go like this. It goes from full to empty. We all understand that. It never goes back to full unless you do something. In that closed system, it runs from order to disorder, they would say. That, even I can understand that. Let me give you another example that I can understand. You walk into a room and you see a candle burning. You've never been in the room before, never seen the candle before, but there are certain things you can understand. You can understand that that candle has never been shorter than it is now, that it was longer, and that if something doesn't change, it will not grow, it will go down. It will change that candle and wick to a gas, and so order to disorder. But in that closed system, unless something else affects it, candles don't burn up, they burn down, if you will. They are consumed. Something else that I think you can pretty well be determined, that candle hasn't always been here. If it had always been here, it would already be gone. Because, such things material things are temporary. They are going from order to disorder. And so the fact that the candle is burning suggests that it hasn't always been burning. And it's going in one direction at a particular rate. You know what it reminds us of as Bible students? You remember, maybe you thought of this, Exodus 3. And here's Moses, and he's keeping his father-in-law's sheep out in the region of Mount Sinai. And in verse 2 of Exodus 3, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from within a bush. And he looked, and the bush was ablaze with fire, but it was not consumed. That's entropy. We would expect it to be consumed. That's just the way material things work. But the fact that it wasn't was a miracle. Moses said, I will turn aside and see this amazing sight. Why the bush is not burnt up. Exactly. And when you think about the universe, beyond a bush or a candle or even a gasoline in a vehicle, the whole of the universe is set up as a material creation based on the law of entropy. The sun, for example. The sun, as we probably learned at some point in school, is a great furnace that's burning fuel. And that there's a limited amount of fuel. Even the sun we look up in the sky, the same sun that shone upon the apostles in their work, that the same sun that Elijah and Elisha saw, the same sun that Adam and Eve saw. The same one, but it's not eternal. And if all of the things being equal, it will burn up, according to those who have studied such things, in about 6 billion years. Now, you and I know that this closed system is going to be affected by God one day. And we don't know, but at some point He's going to call it to a halt. But in about 6 billion years, the Earth's core will run out of, the Sun's core will run out of hydrogen. When this happens, the inert helium ash built up in the core will become unstable. It will collapse under its own weight. The sun burns out. That's the nature of things. You can expand that to the whole of the universe. One fellow, in talking about this principle of entropy and what it teaches us about the universe's origin, makes this point. All systems naturally move toward disorder or entropy over time. Left to themselves, they break down, wear out, become less organized. If the universe is now running down, where did its original order come from? That's a good question. That's a fair question. You know, I think it's maybe not wise for us as parents or you all as young people, as students. Here you are, we're starting high school, we're starting biology, or we're going to college, and maybe as parents we'll tell our children, look, you're going to go take classes in various sciences there and run to these atheist teachers. They're all stupid anyhow. Here's this 38-page book on Christian evidences. You just read this and you'll be able to answer anything that they say. That's not wise. In the first place, those folks are not stupid. Actually, they're smart people. And they've been studying biology or whatever their subject is for maybe 20 or 30 years. And I'll promise you, they can ask some questions that we haven't thought about and we can't answer. So my point is not to be disrespectful or dismissive, but not at the same time to be deceived into thinking that somehow they've got the answers. Because they're basic questions they have no answers for. And I think this is a pretty good one. Just the fact the universe exists, material universe, where did that come from, if not from a creator? There's evidence all around us that points from creation to a first cause. And that being so, I think again, the Scriptures give us the details that we need about God. But before we get there, is there anything we can learn just from looking around us about the first cause, about the Creator? Oh, I think clearly there are some things. In the first place, the Creator must be self-existent, outside of time, outside of space, outside of material things, because He created all those things. The first cause created time, space, and matter. He must be outside of those things. In other words, without limit, infinite. We learn that from what He's made. He is superior. to the things that He's made. In the second place, He is unimaginably powerful. To have created the whole of the universe is I think, a remarkable testament to His power. To speak these into existence from nothing, that speaks to the nature of the first cause. He is supremely intelligent. We're going to look in the next phase of the study about the design of the universe. And note the fact that this is a God. If we are, and we have, all through these years, tried in our studies of various sciences to understand what energy is. You know, you ask your professor when you go to school, what is energy exactly? He doesn't really have a good answer for that. There are all kinds of things. What's the smallest particle? We used to call an atom. We named it that because we thought that was the smallest particle until we realized that the atom was made up of things. And all these other subatomic particles. The point is that we are smart people, dedicated people. We constantly are growing in our knowledge, seeking and searching for answers. But imagine the God, the first cause, who created it all. None of these answers elude Him. He made it. That is a remarkable thing to consider. And then finally, that He is a personal God. Personal in that He chose to convert nothing into something. That was a choice made by one who indeed has personality and will that we associate with a being, not just an inanimate force. It goes back to that old question, philosophical question. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing? You ever considered that question? They say, well, there is no God. Well, okay, then why did all this come about? Either no one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing. Which of those views is most reasonable? Which calls on us to have more faith? Creation without a creator, or creation with a creator? You know, both involve faith, because neither of those views and its subscribers were there when the universe was created. We're looking back and we're trying to decide which is most reasonable. I think it takes a lot more faith to be an atheist from that standpoint than it ever does to be a Christian, to believe in miracles without a miracle worker. That's more faith than I got. It reminds us of that great passage in Psalm 19. The psalmist begins that. He ends it by talking about how that you ultimately cannot escape in your relationship with God, knowing His will, His laws, His statutes, His precepts, His commandments. That's true. We're not suggesting you can know everything you need to know by looking at what He's made. That's not the point. But the psalmist makes the point that it starts. There's enough evidence just by looking at what God's made to know Him. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims His handiwork. Day to day pours out speech. Night to night reveals knowledge. The fact that the universe exists cries out for its creator. And that message, that sermon, if you will, is preached day and night and day and night. We are without excuse. We are willfully blind to see all that God has made and then say, well, you know, who knows? Maybe no God, or I'm convinced there's no God. There's no first cause. Verse 3, there is no speech, and there are no words where the voice is not heard. It doesn't make any difference where you are in the world. The evidence of God is put forth continually and undeniably by anyone who would be fair enough to consider it. Their voice goes through all the earth, their words to the end of the world. In them He has set a tent for the sun. And he goes on, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. In great, beautiful, figurative language, what he portrays is the evidence that God leaves for Himself everywhere, in every culture, in every place on the earth. Sometimes we say I wonder what God's going to do with those people who live in some place way out somewhere where maybe they've never seen a Bible before. I don't have all the answers to that, by the way. But I would say this, that God is always fair and God is provident. But I also think that God has intentionally, by the creation, left evidence for himself everywhere, that men might know about a God, a creator, and from creation discern certain things about him. And such individuals that seek him, I believe that God can and will work with them to find him. That's, I believe, to be true. Whatever else we might ask, maybe I don't know the answer to. But it is a universal, worldwide, that is, evidence for God in what has been made. We can put the formal term of cosmological on it, but that's really what we're talking about. Creation demands a creator, and the universe itself, what God has made, cries out for God. It's rising, talking about the beautiful picture of the sun, as it were, riding in a chariot across the sky. Its rising is from the end of the heaven, its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. It's always there. Let me go back one more time to Jastrow. The scientist who has lived his life, who has lived by his faith in the power of reason. Even Jastrow admits there's a faith involved in the scientific atheistic viewpoint. For him, the story ends like a bad dream. He scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. He pulls himself over the final rock, and he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Yes, it goes back to Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And though I don't claim to be as smart or as well educated as some of those who mouth these views we've been critiquing today, I think it is fair to say in my limited experience, I've never heard a better explanation for the existence of things than that one. And I hope we can communicate that to our children. Don't be surprised if there are questions that you may not be able to answer. But don't let go of the fundamental point that matter does not make itself. And even the critics and deniers of God have to admit that. And that being so, stand firm in that faith. Work out whatever questions we need to, but recognize that the heavens declare the glory of God. It shows not only his existence, but his greatness, his brilliance, his love, his personality. And that is a point that I think will save us during a lot of storms. It'll help us hold firm in the end. I think I'm going to quit here because the next phase of the study has to do, related, but more detailed, not just that things exist, but the design of the universe, its intricacy, is a fascinating and I think undeniable witness for a creator. Because, you know, the intricacy that we see around us does not and cannot happen by accident. So if you'll bear with me, we'll try to take that up in our next study. We're going to sing a song. Let's see. That's it. Very good. All right. Joel tried to show me how to do this, and you can tell I have utterly failed. Let's see. Am I supposed to push Control Enter, Joel? Okay, I tried to do that. 142. And that's what I did. So, I don't know. But let me see if I can do it the old-fashioned way. I think we can do it the old-fashioned way. 140.